What if I told you that most of your emotional pain, stress, and mental exhaustion comes from one simple mistake? A mistake so common that virtually everyone makes it multiple times every single day. This mistake destroys relationships, kills confidence, and keeps people trapped in cycles of anxiety and self-doubt for years. The mistake: taking things personally when they have absolutely nothing to do with you. Think about your last week. How many times did someone's comment make you question yourself? How many times did you replay a conversation wondering what you did wrong? How many times did criticism, rejection, or someone's bad mood send you spiraling into self-doubt? Here's what's happening. You're giving other people complete control over your emotional state. You're letting their words, actions, and opinions dictate how you feel about yourself. And worst of all, you're making their problems about you when they're really about them. This is costing you everything: your peace of mind, your confidence, your energy, your relationships, and your success. But today, that changes. By the end of this content, you'll understand exactly why people say and do what they do, how to protect your emotional energy, and most importantly, how to never let someone else's issues become your emotional reality again. Chapter 1: Why your brain is wired to take everything personally. Let's start with a harsh truth that nobody wants to hear. Your brain is literally designed to make everything about you, not because you're selfish or narcissistic, but because of millions of years of evolutionary programming that once kept our ancestors alive, but now keeps you miserable. Here's how it works. In prehistoric times, being rejected by your tribe meant death. If the group didn't like you, if they criticized you, if they excluded you, you would literally die alone in the wilderness. So, your brain developed an incredibly sensitive threat detection system that treats any sign of social rejection as a life or death situation. When someone criticizes your work, your ancient brain doesn't think about constructive feedback. It thinks survival threat. When someone doesn't respond to your text, your primitive mind doesn't consider that they might be busy. It assumes abandonment and rejection. When someone seems upset around you, your brain doesn't wonder what's going on in their life. It immediately assumes you did something wrong. This is called the fundamental attribution error, and it's destroying your peace of mind. Every single day you attribute other people's behavior to something you did, something you said, or something wrong with you when the reality is that their behavior almost always has nothing to do with you at all. Think about this logically for a moment. How often are you thinking about other people when you're having a bad day? When you're stressed about money? When you're dealing with relationship problems? When you're worried about your health or your career? How much mental energy do you actually spend thinking about criticizing or judging others? Almost none. You're completely absorbed in your own problems, your own fears, your own struggles. Yet when someone else seems upset, distant or critical, you immediately assume it's because of you. This is the self-centered bias in action. Not because you're self-centered, but because your own experience is the only one you have direct access to. You can't see inside other people's minds. So you fill in the gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions are almost always wrong. Here's another crucial insight. Most people are so caught up in their own internal drama that they barely notice you exist. Think about that colleague who made that comment that's been bothering you for weeks. Chances are they forgot. They even said it 5 minutes later. That person who didn't invite you to their event, they probably didn't even think about it. That friend who seemed cold last time you talked, they were likely dealing with something completely unrelated to you. But your brain takes their behavior, runs it through your threat detection system, and creates an entire narrative about what you did wrong, how you're not good enough, and why people don't like you. And here's the kicker. Once your brain creates this narrative, it starts looking for evidence to support it. This is called confirmation bias. You'll notice every slight, every perceived rejection, every moment of criticism while completely ignoring all the positive interactions and signs that people actually do like and respect you. The result: you live in a constant state of social anxiety. Always monitoring other people's reactions, always worried about what they think, always ready to take blame for problems that aren't yours. You become hypervigilant to criticism and rejection, which makes you either defensive and argumentative or withdrawn and people-pleasing. Neither of these responses serves you or improves your relationships. This is why understanding the neuroscience behind taking things personally is so crucial. When you realize that your emotional reactions are often based on ancient survival programming rather than actual threats, you can start to question those reactions instead of automatically believing them. You can begin to separate what's actually happening from what your threat detection system thinks is happening. The first step to not taking things personally is recognizing that your initial emotional response to other people's behavior is not reliable information. It's not telling you the truth about the situation. It's telling you that your brain perceived a potential threat and activated your fight-or-flight response. Once you understand this, you can start to pause between the trigger and your reaction and ask yourself better questions. Chapter 2: The 4 Types of Personal Attacks That Aren't Personal at All. Now that you understand why your brain is wired to make everything about you, let's examine the 4 most common types of situations that feel like personal attacks but are actually revealing everything about the other person and nothing about you. Understanding these patterns will completely change how you interpret other people's behavior. Type 1: The projection attack. This is when someone criticizes you for something they're insecure about themselves. The colleague who constantly questions your work ethic is usually struggling with their own productivity. The friend who accuses you of being selfish is often feeling guilty about their own self-centered behavior. The family member who calls you irresponsible is typically dealing with their own feelings of being out of control. Here's how projection works. People cannot tolerate seeing their own flaws. So their subconscious mind looks for those same flaws in others. When they find them or think they find them, they attack those flaws with unusual intensity. The emotion behind their criticism is way too strong for the situation because they're not just criticizing you. They're trying to get rid of their own uncomfortable feelings about themselves. The telltale sign of projection is disproportionate emotional intensity. If someone gets unusually angry or upset about something relatively minor, if their reaction seems way bigger than the situation warrants, you're probably dealing with projection. They're not really mad at you. They're mad at themselves. And you're just a convenient target. Type 2: The displacement attack. This is when someone takes out their frustration about one situation on a completely unrelated person or situation. Your boss had a fight with their spouse, so they're extra critical of your presentation. Your friend is stressed about money, so they snap at you for being 5 minutes late. Your family member is dealing with health problems, so they become irritable and short with everyone around them. Displacement happens because most people don't know how to process their emotions effectively. When they're upset about something they can't control or don't want to face directly, that emotional energy has to go somewhere. Unfortunately, it usually goes toward the safest, most available target, which is often someone who cares about them and won't fight back or abandon them. The key to recognizing displacement is timing and context. If someone's behavior toward you has suddenly changed, if they're treating you differently than they normally do, look at what else is happening in their life. Are they dealing with stress at work, problems in their relationship, financial pressure, health issues, family drama? Their treatment of you probably has nothing to do with anything you've done and everything to do with their inability to cope with their real problems. Type 3: The insecurity attack. This is when someone puts you down to make themselves feel better. The person who constantly points out your mistakes is usually trying to distract from their own. The friend who makes subtle digs about your success is dealing with their own feelings of inadequacy. The family member who criticizes your choices is often questioning their own decisions. Insecurity attacks are particularly damaging because they often come from people close to you, people whose opinions you value. But here's what you need to understand. Secure, confident people don't put others down. Happy people don't try to make others unhappy. Successful people don't waste time criticizing others' success. When someone consistently tries to make you feel bad about yourself, it's because they feel bad about themselves. The pattern to watch for is consistency. If someone regularly finds fault with you, if they can never seem to be genuinely happy for your successes, if they always have something negative to say, you're dealing with someone whose self-esteem is so low that your confidence threatens them. Their criticism is not feedback about you. It's information about their own inner turmoil. Type 4. The control attack. This is when someone gets upset with you for not meeting expectations you never agreed to. Your friend is mad because you didn't call them back quickly enough, even though you never promised to be available 24/7. Your family member is disappointed because you made a choice they wouldn't make, even though it's your life to live. Your colleague is frustrated because you didn't handle something the way they would have, even though you achieved the same result. Control attacks happen when people have unrealistic expectations about how others should behave. They've created rules in their head about how relationships should work, how people should communicate, how situations should be handled, and they expect everyone else to follow these rules without ever actually communicating them clearly. The hallmark of a control attack is the phrase "you should have" or "you're supposed to," followed by something you never actually agreed to do. When someone is angry at you for not reading their mind, for not prioritizing what they would prioritize, or for not handling something exactly the way they would handle it, they're not really upset with you. They're upset that they can't control you, and that discomfort with their own lack of control is being directed at you. Understanding these 4 types of attacks that aren't actually personal is game-changing because it allows you to see other people's behavior for what it really is. Information about their internal state, not a judgment on your worth as a person. When you can identify projection, displacement, insecurity, and control issues in others' behavior, you can respond with understanding instead of defensiveness, boundaries instead of blame, and compassion instead of counterattacks. Chapter 3. The devastating cost of making other people's problems your own. Before we dive into how to stop taking things personally, you need to fully understand what this habit is costing you. Because until you realize the true price you're paying for absorbing other people's emotions and making their issues about you, you won't be motivated enough to change this deeply ingrained pattern. Let's start with your mental health. Every time you take something personally, you're essentially hijacking your own nervous system. Your stress hormones spike, your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, and your brain floods with cortisol and adrenaline. Your body goes into fight or flight mode over something that isn't even a real threat to your survival or well-being. Now imagine this happening multiple times every day. Someone makes a comment and you spend the next hour analyzing what you did wrong. Someone doesn't text you back and you create 3 different stories about why they're upset with you. Someone seems distant, and you replay every interaction you've had with them, looking for clues about how you offended them. Your nervous system is constantly activated, constantly preparing for threats that don't exist. This chronic stress is literally rewiring your brain for anxiety and depression. When you repeatedly take things personally, you're training your brain to see social threats everywhere, to interpret neutral situations as negative, and to default to self-blame and self-doubt. You're creating neural pathways that make it easier and easier to feel bad about yourself and harder to feel confident and secure. The impact on your relationships is equally devastating. When you take things personally, you become exhausting to be around. People start walking on eggshells, afraid that anything they say might trigger your emotional reaction. They begin avoiding difficult conversations because they know you'll make it about yourself. They stop giving you honest feedback because they've learned that you can't handle criticism without falling apart. But it gets worse. When you consistently take things personally, you train the people in your life to manage your emotions instead of their own. Your friends stop telling you when they're having a bad day because you'll assume it's your fault and make their problem about comforting you. Your colleagues stop sharing their stress because you'll interpret it as criticism of your performance and create more drama than they started with. This pattern destroys intimacy because intimacy requires the ability to hold space for someone else's emotions without making them about you. When your partner is upset about work, you need to be able to listen and support them without assuming they're really upset with you. When your friend is going through a difficult time, you need to be able to show up for them without making their pain about your inadequacy as a friend. Taking things personally also kills your ability to receive feedback and grow. When someone offers constructive criticism, instead of seeing it as valuable information that could help you improve, you hear it as an attack on your character. You become defensive, argumentative, or you shut down completely. You miss opportunities to learn and develop because you're too busy protecting your ego from imaginary threats. Your career suffers tremendously from this pattern. Leadership requires the ability to make decisions based on facts and data, not on whether those decisions might hurt someone's feelings or make them think less of you. It requires the ability to have difficult conversations, give honest feedback, and set clear boundaries. When you take things personally, you avoid conflict. You people please instead of leading, and you make decisions based on what will make people like you rather than what will achieve the best results. Even your physical health pays the price. Chronic stress from constantly taking things personally leads to headaches, insomnia, digestive problems, muscle tension, and a weakened immune system. You're literally making yourself sick by absorbing other people's emotions and making their problems your own. Perhaps most tragically, taking things personally prevents you from developing a strong, stable sense of self-worth. Instead of building confidence from your own achievements, values, and growth, you become dependent on other people's approval for your self-esteem. Your mood depends on how others treat you. Your confidence fluctuates based on external validation. You become a slave to other people's opinions, moods, and behaviors. This creates a vicious cycle. The more you take things personally, the more insecure you become. The more insecure you become, the more likely you are to interpret neutral situations as threats. The more threats you perceive, the more defensive and reactive you become. The more defensive and reactive you become, the more likely you are to create actual conflict and rejection, which then validates your fears and makes you take things even more personally. But here's what's particularly insidious about this pattern. It feels like caring. It feels like being a good friend, a dedicated employee, a loving family member. You tell yourself that you take things personally because you care so much about your relationships, because you want to do a good job, because you're a sensitive, empathetic person. But that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is that you're avoiding the hard work of developing genuine self-worth, healthy boundaries, and emotional resilience. You're choosing the familiar pain of self-doubt and people-pleasing over the unfamiliar challenge of standing in your own truth and letting others be responsible for their own emotions. You're hiding behind false humility and excessive responsibility taking instead of doing the real work of building authentic confidence and secure relationships. The cost of taking things personally is nothing less than your peace of mind, your authentic self, your healthy relationships, and your ability to show up fully in your own life. It's time to stop paying this price. It's time to learn a different way. Chapter 4. The truth about what other people's behavior really means. Here's a revolutionary concept that will change everything about how you interpret other people's actions. What people do and say is always about them. Never about you. Always. This isn't just a nice saying to make you feel better. It's a fundamental truth about human psychology that once you truly understand, it will set you free from taking anything personally ever again. Let me explain exactly what this means and why it's true. Every person you encounter is operating from their own unique combination of past experiences, current stresses, unconscious fears, unhealed traumas, personal insecurities, and deeply held beliefs about themselves and the world. When they interact with you, they're not seeing you clearly. They're seeing you through the filter of all their own stuff. Think about this practically. When someone criticizes you harshly, they're not giving you objective information about your performance or character. They're showing you how they talk to themselves in their own head. People who are cruel to others are cruel to themselves. People who are critical of others are critical of themselves. People who are impatient with others are impatient with themselves. They're not revealing your flaws. They're revealing their own patterns of inner dialogue. When someone doesn't respond to your text, they're not making a statement about your importance to them. They're dealing with their own overwhelm, their own avoidance patterns, their own relationship with communication and technology. Some people respond to messages immediately because they're anxious about disappointing others. Some people take days because they're overwhelmed by social obligations. Some people forget because they're distracted by their own problems. None of these responses are about you. When someone seems cold or distant, they're not necessarily upset with you. They might be dealing with depression, anxiety, family problems, work stress, health issues, financial pressure, or 100 other things that have nothing to do with you. Their emotional state is a reflection of what's happening in their inner world, not a response to your presence or actions. Here's another crucial insight. People can only give you what they have to give. Someone who doesn't know how to be emotionally supportive can't suddenly become supportive just because you need them to be. Someone who struggles with consistency can't suddenly become reliable just because you want them to be. Someone who has never learned healthy communication can't suddenly start communicating well just because you're frustrated with their approach. This doesn't mean you should accept poor treatment or lower your standards. It means you should understand that other people's limitations are about their own development, skills, and healing journey, not about your worth, or what you deserve. When someone can't show up for you the way you need, it's information about their capacity, not a judgment on your value. Let's talk about the projection principle in more detail because this is where the magic happens. Every criticism, every judgment, every negative comment someone makes about you is actually them telling you about their own inner experience. The colleague who says you're not working hard enough is likely struggling with their own productivity and feeling insecure about their contribution. The friend who accuses you of being selfish is probably feeling guilty about their own self-centered behavior. The family member who says you're making bad choices is likely questioning their own decisions. The intensity of someone's reaction to your behavior is directly proportional to how much that behavior triggers something unresolved in their own psyche. If someone gets disproportionately upset about something small, if their reaction seems way bigger than the situation warrants, you're looking at their trigger, not your mistake. You've accidentally poked at one of their wounds and they're reacting from that pain. This is why the same behavior can get completely different reactions from different people. You can make the same joke and one person will laugh while another gets offended. You can use the same communication style and one person will appreciate your directness while another thinks you're being rude. You can make the same choice and one person will support you while another criticizes you. The difference isn't in what you did. The difference is in what each person brings to the interaction. Understanding this principle also explains why people's treatment of you can change dramatically based on what's happening in their own lives. The friend who's usually supportive might become critical when they're going through their own crisis. The boss who's normally reasonable might become difficult when they're under pressure from their own superiors. The family member who's typically loving might become distant when they're dealing with their own problems. These changes aren't about you. They're about their capacity to show up differently when they're struggling. This is also why trying to change other people's behavior by changing your own rarely works. If someone is consistently critical, being more perfect won't make them less critical. They'll just find new things to criticize because their criticism is coming from their own inner critic, not from any objective assessment of your performance. If someone is emotionally unavailable, being more loving won't make them more available. They're unavailable because of their own fears and limitations, not because you're not lovable enough. Here's the profound shift that happens when you truly understand this principle. Other people's behavior stops being about you and starts being information about them. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" You start asking what are they going through instead of wondering why don't they like me. You start wondering what wound of theirs did I accidentally touch instead of thinking I need to fix this. You start thinking this isn't mine to fix. This doesn't mean you become callous or dismissive of others' feelings. It means you stop taking responsibility for emotions and reactions that aren't yours to manage. It means you can have compassion for others' struggles without making those struggles about your inadequacy. It means you can receive feedback without your self-worth being dependent on that feedback. It means you can let people have their reactions without those reactions defining your reality. Chapter 5. Building unshakable internal worth that can't be threatened. The reason you take things personally is because your sense of worth is externally dependent. You need other people to validate your value, confirm your lovability, and reassure you that you're okay. This makes you incredibly vulnerable to every opinion, mood, and reaction from others. But what if your worth came from somewhere that no one else could touch? What if you built such a strong foundation of internal value that external criticism couldn't shake you? This is the secret that confident people know but rarely talk about. Their self-worth doesn't depend on external validation. They've done the inner work to build a sense of value that comes from within that's based on their own relationship with themselves rather than other people's opinions about them. And you can build this too. The first step is understanding the difference between self-worth and self-esteem. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself based on your performance, achievements, and how others treat you. It fluctuates based on external circumstances. You feel good about yourself when you succeed. When people praise you, when things go well, you feel bad about yourself when you fail. When people criticize you, when things go poorly. Self-worth, on the other hand, is your fundamental belief about your inherent value as a human being. It's not based on what you do, what you achieve, or how others treat you. It's based on the simple fact that you exist, that you're a conscious being capable of growth, love, and contribution. Self-worth is stable. It doesn't change based on external circumstances because it's not dependent on external circumstances. Building true self-worth starts with accepting yourself completely, including your flaws, mistakes, and imperfections. This doesn't mean you stop trying to grow and improve. It means you stop making your growth conditional on your self-acceptance. Most people have it backwards. They think they'll accept themselves once they fix all their problems, once they achieve their goals, once they become the person they think they should be. But it doesn't work that way. Self-acceptance has to come first. You have to love yourself into growth, not hate yourself into change. You have to accept where you are now as a starting point, not as a failure. You have to embrace your humanity, including your limitations and imperfections, as part of what makes you real and relatable and worthy of love. This requires developing a new internal voice, a voice that speaks to you with the same kindness, patience, and encouragement that you would offer to a good friend going through a difficult time. Most people's internal dialogue is harsh, critical, and demanding. They talk to themselves in ways they would never talk to someone they cared about. They set impossible standards and then beat themselves up for not meeting them. But you can change this voice. You can train yourself to speak to yourself with compassion, understanding, and support. When you make a mistake, instead of saying, "I'm so stupid," you can say, "That didn't go well, but I'm learning." When someone criticizes you, instead of thinking, "They're right, I'm not good enough," you can think, "That's their perspective and I can consider it without making it mean anything about my worth." Building internal worth also means developing a strong value system that guides your decisions regardless of what others think. You need to know what matters to you, what you stand for, what kind of person you want to be. These values become your North Star, your internal compass that helps you navigate difficult situations without needing external validation. When your values are clear and you're living in alignment with them, other people's opinions become much less important. If someone criticizes you for being too honest, but honesty is one of your core values, their criticism doesn't threaten you because you know you're being true to what matters most to you. If someone doesn't like your boundaries, but you know those boundaries are necessary for your well-being. Their disapproval doesn't shake you because you're acting from integrity. Another crucial component of unshakable internal worth is developing a practice of self-appreciation. Most people are experts at noticing what's wrong with themselves, but terrible at acknowledging what's right. They focus on their mistakes, their shortcomings, their areas for improvement while completely ignoring their strengths, their progress, their positive qualities. You need to actively train yourself to notice and appreciate your own positive qualities. Keep a daily list of things you did well, choices you made that you're proud of, moments when you showed up as your best self. Acknowledge your efforts, not just your results. Celebrate your growth, not just your achievements. Treat yourself with the same recognition and appreciation that you would give to someone else making the same efforts. This isn't about becoming narcissistic or delusional about your abilities. It's about developing a balanced, realistic view of yourself that includes both your areas for growth and your existing strengths. It's about learning to be your own cheerleader instead of your own worst critic. It's about building an internal relationship that supports and encourages you rather than constantly tearing you down. True internal worth also comes from understanding your unique contribution to the world. Everyone has something valuable to offer. Some combination of skills, perspectives, experiences, and qualities that no one else has in exactly the same way. Your job is not to be perfect or to be like everyone else. Your job is to discover and develop your own unique gifts and share them with the world in your own authentic way. This means accepting that not everyone will appreciate what you have to offer. And that's not only okay, it's necessary. If everyone liked you, if everyone agreed with you, if everyone wanted what you're offering, it would mean you're not being authentic enough, not standing for anything meaningful enough, not taking enough risks to truly be yourself. Rejection and criticism become neutral information rather than threats. When you understand that you're not meant to appeal to everyone, building unshakable internal worth is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice, a choice you make over and over again to value yourself regardless of external circumstances. It's the decision to be your own source of validation, encouragement, and support. It's the commitment to treating yourself with the same kindness, patience, and understanding that you would offer to anyone else you truly cared about. Chapter 6. The 3-second rule that changes everything. There's a moment between when something happens and when you react to it. A tiny window of opportunity that most people miss completely. This moment is where your power lives. It's where you can choose to take something personally or let it bounce off you like water off a duck's back. Master this moment and you master your emotional life. I call it the 3-second rule, and it's the most practical tool you'll ever learn for not taking things personally. Here's how it works. When someone says or does something that would normally trigger you, instead of immediately reacting, you pause for 3 seconds and ask yourself one simple question. Is this about me or is this about them? Those 3 seconds give your prefrontal cortex time to come online. When you're triggered, your amygdala hijacks your brain and you react from emotion instead of logic. But if you can create just 3 seconds of space between the trigger and your response, you activate the rational part of your brain that can actually think clearly about what's happening. In those 3 seconds, you're looking for evidence. Is what they're saying or doing consistent with how they treat everyone, or are you being singled out? Are they having a bad day, dealing with stress, or showing signs of their own emotional struggles? Is their reaction proportionate to the situation, or does it seem bigger than it should be? Is this feedback about your actual performance? Or is this them projecting their own insecurities? Let me give you some examples of how this works in real life. Your boss snaps at you during a meeting. Old, you would immediately start spiraling. What did I do wrong? Are they going to fire me? Do they think I'm incompetent? New you takes 3 seconds and notices. They've been short with everyone all week. They mentioned being stressed about the quarterly numbers and their reaction was way too intense for the minor issue they brought up. Conclusion. This is about their stress, not your performance. Your friend doesn't respond to your text for 2 days. Old you would create stories. They're mad at me. I said something wrong. They don't want to be friends anymore. New you takes 3 seconds and remembers. They just started a new job. They mentioned being overwhelmed and they've always been a slow texter. Conclusion. This is about their bandwidth, not your friendship. Your family member makes a critical comment about your life choices. Old you would get defensive and hurt. They don't support me. They think I'm making mistakes. Maybe they're right and I am screwing up. New you takes 3 seconds and recognizes they've been making similar comments to everyone in the family. They're dealing with their own midlife crisis and their tone suggests more worry than criticism. Conclusion. This is about their anxiety, not your choices. The 3-second rule works because it interrupts your automatic reaction pattern. Most people have been taking things personally for so long that it's become completely unconscious. Someone does something, they immediately make it about themselves and they react from that assumption. But when you pause, even briefly, you give yourself the chance to consider other explanations. Here's what's particularly powerful about this technique. It doesn't require you to be perfect. You don't need to eliminate your initial emotional reaction. You just need to pause long enough to question whether that reaction is based on accurate information. You can feel hurt and still recognize that the hurt is coming from your interpretation, not necessarily from the other person's intention. The 3-second rule also helps you respond instead of react. When you react, you're operating from emotion, impulse, and old patterns. When you respond, you're operating from choice, intention, and wisdom. Reactions are automatic. Responses are conscious. Reactions often make situations worse. Responses usually make them better. During those 3 seconds, you're also choosing your energy. Every time you take something personally, you're giving your emotional energy away. You're letting someone else's mood, opinion, or behavior dictate how you feel. But when you pause and recognize that their behavior is about them, you keep your energy for yourself. You stay centered, grounded, and in control of your own emotional state. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or disconnected. It means you become discerning. You learn to distinguish between what deserves your emotional energy and what doesn't. You learn to respond appropriately to actual problems while not getting swept away by other people's projections, bad days, or personal struggles. The 3-second rule becomes even more powerful when you combine it with curiosity instead of assumptions. Instead of immediately assuming the worst, you get curious about what might really be happening. I wonder what's going on for them right now. I wonder if they're dealing with something I don't know about. I wonder if there's another way to interpret this situation. Curiosity keeps you open and flexible instead of defensive and reactive. It allows you to gather more information before drawing conclusions. It helps you approach situations with compassion instead of judgment. And it often reveals that what seemed like a personal attack was actually someone reaching out for help, expressing their own pain, or simply having a human moment of imperfection. Practice this rule consistently, and you'll be amazed at how much more peaceful your relationships become. You'll stop creating drama where none exists. You'll stop taking on emotional responsibilities that aren't yours. You'll stop making other people's problems about your inadequacy. Most importantly, you'll start showing up as the calm, centered, emotionally intelligent person you're capable of being. Chapter 7. How to decode what people are really telling you about themselves. Every interaction you have with another person is like receiving a coded message. They think they're telling you about you, but they're actually telling you about themselves. Learning to decode these messages is like developing a superpower. It protects you from taking things personally while giving you incredible insight into how to navigate relationships more effectively. Let's start with criticism because this is where most people get triggered. When someone criticizes you, they're showing you their standards, their values, and their expectations. They're revealing what they focus on, what they worry about, and what they think is important. This information tells you much more about them than it does about you. Someone who constantly criticizes others' work ethic probably has deep anxiety about their own productivity. Someone who frequently points out others' flaws likely has perfectionist tendencies and is probably very harsh with themselves. Someone who always finds something to complain about is usually dealing with their own dissatisfaction and unhappiness. But here's where it gets really interesting. The specific nature of someone's criticism reveals their own insecurities and wounds. If someone calls you selfish, they're probably struggling with guilt about their own self-centeredness. If someone accuses you of being irresponsible, they're likely feeling out of control in their own life. If someone says you're not good enough, they're almost certainly dealing with their own feelings of inadequacy. This is projection at its finest. And once you understand how to spot it, you'll never take criticism personally again. The more emotionally charged someone's criticism is, the more it's about their own unresolved issues. Constructive feedback is calm, specific, and focused on behavior. Personal attacks are emotional, general, and focused on character. When someone crosses the line from feedback to attack, they've just told you everything you need to know about their own inner turmoil. Now, let's decode praise. Because this is equally revealing. The things people compliment you on tell you what they value, what they wish they had more of, and what they're drawn to in others. Someone who consistently praises your confidence probably struggles with their own self-doubt. Someone who always comments on your independence likely wishes they had more autonomy in their own life. Someone who admires your authenticity is probably tired of pretending to be someone they're not. Understanding this doesn't diminish the value of genuine praise, but it helps you receive it without becoming dependent on it. When you recognize that compliments often say as much about the giver as the receiver, you can appreciate them without needing them for your self-worth. Let's talk about emotional reactions because these are perhaps the most revealing of all. The intensity of someone's emotional response to your behavior is directly proportional to how much that behavior triggers something unresolved in their own psyche. If someone gets disproportionately angry about something minor, if they seem unusually hurt by something that shouldn't be that big a deal, if they react with more emotion than the situation warrants, you're looking at their trigger, not your mistake. For example, if you're 5 minutes late and someone becomes furious, their anger isn't really about those 5 minutes. It might be about feeling disrespected, abandoned, or unimportant. Those feelings are coming from their past experiences, their relationship patterns, their core wounds. Your lateness was just the trigger that activated something much deeper. This is why the same behavior can get completely different reactions from different people. You can use the same communication style and one person will appreciate your directness while another feels attacked. You can make the same choice and one person will support you while another takes it as a personal rejection. The difference isn't in what you did. The difference is in what each person brings to the interaction. People's communication styles also reveal tremendous amounts about their inner world. Someone who communicates through guilt trips and manipulation has probably learned that direct communication doesn't work for them, possibly because they were raised in an environment where their needs weren't heard or respected. Someone who avoids conflict at all costs likely has a deep fear of abandonment or rejection. Someone who always needs to be right probably has deep insecurities about their intelligence or worth. Understanding these patterns helps you respond more effectively when someone tries to guilt trip you. You can recognize it as their learned strategy for getting needs met, not as accurate information about your character. When someone avoids difficult conversations, you can see it as their fear of conflict, not as a reflection of how they feel about you. When someone becomes defensive, you can understand it as their protection mechanism, not as evidence that you've done something wrong. Even the way people treat others tells you everything about how they treat themselves. Kind people are kind to themselves. Critical people are critical of themselves. Impatient people are impatient with themselves. Judgmental people judge themselves harshly. Compassionate people have learned to have compassion for their own struggles. This insight completely changes how you interpret others' behavior toward you. When someone is consistently harsh with you, it's not because you deserve harsh treatment. It's because harshness is their default setting, probably learned from how they were treated or how they learned to treat themselves. When someone is unusually patient and understanding, it's often because they've done their own work to develop those qualities. Not because you're particularly easy to deal with. Here's the most liberating realization of all. People's behavior toward you is much more about their current emotional state, their past experiences, their unconscious patterns, and their learned coping strategies than it is about anything you've actually said or done. This doesn't mean your behavior never impacts others or that you're never responsible for your actions. It means that the intensity and nature of their reactions are filtered through their own psychological makeup. Once you truly understand this principle, other people's behavior becomes fascinating instead of threatening, instead of taking everything personally. You become curious about what their reactions reveal about their inner world. Instead of getting defensive, you develop empathy for the struggles that might be driving their behavior. Instead of making it about you, you recognize it as information about them. Chapter 8. The Art of Emotional Boundaries That Protect Your Peace. Imagine having an invisible shield around you that allows love, kindness, and genuine connection to flow through while deflecting criticism, negativity, and other people's emotional chaos. This isn't fantasy. It's what emotional boundaries look like when you know how to create and maintain them. Most people think boundaries are about keeping others out, but healthy emotional boundaries are actually about keeping yourself in. They're about maintaining your own emotional center regardless of what's happening around you. The first type of boundary you need is the responsibility boundary. This is the clear line between what's your responsibility and what belongs to other people. You're responsible for your own emotions, reactions, choices, and behavior. You're not responsible for other people's emotions, reactions, choices, or behavior. This sounds simple, but most people violate this boundary constantly. When your friend is upset, you're responsible for being supportive and caring. You're not responsible for making them feel better. When your colleague is stressed, you're responsible for being professional and helpful. You're not responsible for managing their stress. When your family member is disappointed in your choices, you're responsible for being respectful and understanding. You're not responsible for making choices that meet their expectations. The responsibility boundary protects you from taking on emotional burdens that aren't yours to carry. It prevents you from feeling guilty about other people's reactions to your healthy choices. It stops you from trying to control outcomes that are beyond your influence. Most importantly, it allows you to show up with genuine care and support without getting emotionally drained or manipulated. The second crucial boundary is the interpretation boundary. This is your right to interpret situations, behaviors, and comments through your own lens rather than automatically accepting other people's version of reality. When someone tells you that you're selfish, you don't have to accept that interpretation. When someone says you've hurt their feelings, you can acknowledge their feelings without accepting responsibility for causing them if you acted with good intentions and appropriate behavior. This boundary is particularly important with people who use emotional manipulation. Some people will tell you that you're mean, selfish, inconsiderate, or wrong whenever you don't do what they want. They'll frame your boundaries as attacks. Your self-care as selfishness, your independence as rejection. The interpretation boundary allows you to say, I understand that's how you see it, but that's not my intention or my experience. The third boundary is the energy boundary. This protects your emotional and mental energy from being drained by other people's drama, negativity, or emotional volatility. Energy boundaries mean you don't absorb other people's moods. You don't take on their anxiety, depression, or anger as your own. You can be present and supportive without becoming emotionally entangled in their problems. Energy boundaries look like leaving conversations that consistently bring you down. They look like limiting time with people who are chronic complainers or drama creators. They look like refusing to engage in gossip, negativity, or circular conversations that go nowhere. They look like protecting your peace as fiercely as you would protect your physical health. The fourth boundary is the standards boundary. This is your right to have standards for how you're treated and to maintain those standards regardless of other people's reactions. You have the right to be spoken to respectfully. You have the right to have your time valued. You have the right to be treated with basic courtesy and consideration. These aren't unreasonable demands. They're minimum requirements for healthy relationships. Standards boundaries mean you don't accept being yelled at, insulted, manipulated, or consistently disrespected. Even if the other person claims they're having a bad day or going through a difficult time, their struggles explain their behavior, but don't excuse it. You can have compassion for their situation while still maintaining your standards for how you're treated. The most challenging part of creating emotional boundaries is dealing with other people's reactions to them. When you start protecting your emotional space, some people will not be happy about it. They might accuse you of being selfish, mean, or uncaring. They might increase their emotional pressure, trying to guilt you back into your old patterns. They might even threaten to end the relationship if you don't go back to absorbing their emotions and managing their reactions. Here's what you need to understand. Their reaction to your boundaries is information about the relationship, not evidence that your boundaries are wrong. Healthy people respect boundaries. They might need time to adjust to new dynamics, but they ultimately appreciate clarity about expectations and limits. People who become angry, manipulative, or punitive when you set boundaries are showing you that they were benefiting from your lack of boundaries and don't want that dynamic to change. Setting boundaries doesn't mean becoming cold or disconnected. You can still be loving, supportive, and engaged while maintaining your emotional protection. In fact, boundaries often improve relationships because they allow you to show up more authentically and consistently. When you're not constantly drained, resentful, or walking on eggshells, you can be more present and genuinely caring. Boundaries also don't mean you never help others, or that you become completely self-centered. They mean you help from choice rather than obligation, from strength rather than depletion, from love rather than fear. When your emotional boundaries are strong, you can be incredibly generous with your time, energy, and support because you're giving from overflow rather than emptiness. The key to maintaining emotional boundaries is consistency. You can't have boundaries sometimes and not others. You can't enforce them with some people but not others. People need to know what to expect from you, and you need to know that you'll protect your own emotional well-being regardless of external pressure. Strong emotional boundaries require you to be comfortable with other people's discomfort. You have to be willing to let others be upset with your choices, disappointed in your decisions, or unhappy with your limits. This is perhaps the most difficult part of boundary setting, but it's also the most liberating. When you can let others have their reactions without making those reactions your problem, you become truly free. Chapter 9. Turning criticism into fuel for growth instead of self-doubt. Criticism doesn't have to be your kryptonite. In fact, it can become one of your greatest tools for growth and self-improvement, but only if you know how to process it without taking it personally. The difference between people who are crushed by criticism and those who use it to become better lies entirely in how they interpret and respond to feedback. Let's start with understanding the different types of criticism because not all feedback is created equal. Constructive criticism comes from a place of genuine care and desire to help you improve. It's specific, actionable, and focused on behavior rather than character. It's delivered with respect and consideration for your feelings. This type of criticism is a gift even when it's hard to hear. Destructive criticism, on the other hand, comes from the critic's own pain, insecurity, or need to feel superior. It's often general, personal, and focused on attacking your character rather than addressing specific behaviors. It's delivered with the intention to hurt, diminish, or control rather than to help. This type of criticism tells you nothing useful about yourself and everything about the person delivering it. The first step in handling criticism without taking it personally is learning to distinguish between these two types. Ask yourself, is this feedback specific and actionable or vague and attacking? Is it focused on my behavior or my character? Is it delivered with respect or with the intention to hurt? Is this person qualified to give this type of feedback, or are they speaking from their own unresolved issues? When you receive constructive criticism, even if it stings initially, you can extract the valuable information without making it mean anything about your worth as a person. Someone pointing out that you interrupted them during the meeting isn't saying you're a bad person. They're giving you information about a specific behavior that affected them. Someone suggesting you could be more thorough in your reports isn't attacking your intelligence. They're helping you understand their expectations. The key is to separate the information from the emotion. Yes, it might hurt to hear that you're not meeting someone's expectations or that your behavior had a negative impact. That hurt is normal and doesn't mean you're taking it personally. Taking it personally would be making that feedback mean you're fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or doomed to fail. Here's a powerful reframe that changes everything. Instead of hearing criticism as "you're wrong," hear it as "here's another perspective," or "here's some information about impact." Instead of interpreting feedback as an attack on your character, receive it as data about how you can be more effective, more considerate, or more skilled. This doesn't mean you accept all criticism as truth. Some feedback is inaccurate, unfair, or based on misunderstandings. But you can consider it without being destroyed by it. You can evaluate whether there's any validity to the criticism without making your self-worth dependent on being perfect or never receiving negative feedback. When dealing with destructive criticism, the skill is recognizing it for what it is and not allowing it to penetrate your emotional defenses. If someone calls you worthless, lazy, or stupid, that's not feedback. That's them projecting their own pain onto you. If someone attacks your character rather than addressing specific behaviors, they're not trying to help you improve. They're trying to make themselves feel better by making you feel worse with destructive criticism. Your job is not to find the grain of truth or to use it for growth. Your job is to recognize it as toxic and protect yourself from absorbing it. You can acknowledge that they're entitled to their opinion without making their opinion your reality. You can understand that they're speaking from their own wounds without taking responsibility for healing those wounds. One of the most powerful tools for processing criticism without taking it personally is the 24-hour rule. When you receive difficult feedback, especially if it triggers strong emotions, commit to not making any major decisions or drawing any permanent conclusions about yourself for at least 24 hours. This gives your initial emotional reaction time to settle and allows your rational mind to engage with the feedback more objectively. During those 24 hours, ask yourself some important questions. What specific behavior was mentioned? And is that behavior something I want to change? Is there a pattern here that I've heard from multiple sources? What would I tell a good friend who received this same feedback? How can I use this information to become better without making it mean I'm currently bad? Another crucial skill is learning to thank people for constructive criticism even when it's difficult to hear. This doesn't mean you're agreeing with everything they said or admitting that you're wrong. It means you're appreciating their willingness to give you potentially useful information. Thank you for that feedback is a powerful response because it keeps the conversation productive and shows that you're secure enough to consider other perspectives when criticism triggers shame. Remember that shame is always disproportionate to the situation. Guilt says I did something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. Guilt is about behavior and can motivate positive change. Shame is about identity and only motivates hiding, defending, or attacking. If criticism is making you feel fundamentally flawed as a person, you've moved from processing feedback to taking it personally. The growth mindset is essential for handling criticism well. People with a growth mindset believe that abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort and learning. They see criticism as information that can help them improve. People with a fixed mindset believe that abilities and intelligence are static traits. They see criticism as evidence that they're not good enough and probably never will be. When you operate from a growth mindset, criticism becomes fuel for development rather than evidence of inadequacy. A missed deadline becomes information about time management skills that can be improved. Not proof that you're irresponsible. A relationship conflict becomes data about communication patterns that can be refined, not evidence that you're unlovable. Here's the ultimate reframe. Criticism is not about your worth. It's about your effectiveness. Someone pointing out ways you could be more effective is actually showing you the path to greater success and impact. They're giving you the road map for improvement that many people never receive because others are too polite, too uncomfortable, or too busy to offer honest feedback. The most confident people actively seek out criticism because they know it's how they grow. They ask for feedback regularly. They create safe spaces for people to be honest with them. They separate their ego from their performance because they understand that excellence requires constantly identifying and addressing areas for improvement. Chapter 10. The Ultimate Freedom. When other people's opinions stop controlling your life, there's a moment in everyone's journey toward emotional freedom. When something extraordinary happens, you realize that other people's opinions about you are just thoughts in their heads. And thoughts in someone else's head have absolutely no power over your reality unless you give them that power. This realization is the gateway to ultimate freedom from taking things personally. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of other people's opinions. They make decisions based on what others will think. They change their behavior to avoid judgment. They hide their true selves to gain approval. They sacrifice their dreams to meet others' expectations. They carry the weight of everyone else's perceptions like a backpack full of rocks, wondering why life feels so heavy and exhausting. But what if you could set that backpack down? What if you could live your life based on your own values, your own vision, your own definition of success? What if you could be authentically yourself without constantly monitoring other people's reactions? This isn't just possible, it's your birthright as a conscious, autonomous human being. The first step to this freedom is understanding that everyone's opinion is filtered through their own experience, beliefs, and limitations. When someone judges your choices, they're not giving you objective truth about those choices. They're telling you how your choices look from inside their particular worldview. Someone who values security above all else will judge your risk-taking as foolish. Someone who values conformity will judge your authenticity as attention-seeking. Someone who's afraid of failure will judge your ambition as unrealistic. Their opinion says nothing about the actual value or wisdom of your choices. It only tells you about their values, fears, and limitations. Once you truly understand this, other people's judgments lose their power to define your reality. You can hear them, consider them if they're useful, and let them go if they're not. All without your self-worth fluctuating based on their approval or disapproval. Here's another liberating truth. You can't control what other people think about you. And trying to do so is the fastest path to misery and inauthenticity. No matter how perfectly you behave, how carefully you speak, how much you achieve, someone will still find something to criticize. No matter how kind, generous, or thoughtful you are, someone will still misunderstand your intentions or judge your actions. This isn't a flaw in the system. It's how the system is designed to work. Everyone sees the world through different lenses based on their experiences, conditioning, and current emotional state. What looks like kindness to one person looks like manipulation to another. What seems like confidence to one person seems like arrogance to another. What appears as necessary boundaries to one person appears as coldness to another. When you accept that you cannot and will not please everyone, you free yourself to focus on what actually matters, living in alignment with your own values and being true to your authentic self. You stop contorting yourself to fit other people's expectations and start making choices based on what feels right for you. The fear of judgment often keeps people trapped in lives that don't fit them. They stay in jobs they hate because others think they should be grateful for employment. They remain in relationships that don't serve them because others think they should make it work. They hide their talents because others might think they're showing off. They shrink their dreams because others think they're being unrealistic. But here's what's truly tragic. The people whose opinions you're so worried about are often dealing with their own insecurities, limitations, and fears. They're not living boldly either. They're not pursuing their own dreams or taking their own risks. So, you're allowing people who are playing small to keep you playing small. You're letting people who are afraid of judgment convince you to be afraid of judgment, too. The path to freedom requires you to develop what I call opinion immunity. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of all feedback. It means developing the discernment to distinguish between opinions that serve you and opinions that don't. Between feedback that helps you grow and judgment that only holds you back. Opinion immunity means understanding that someone's disapproval of your choices doesn't make those choices wrong. It means recognizing that someone's inability to understand your path doesn't make your path invalid. It means knowing that someone's discomfort with your authenticity is information about their comfort zone, not about whether you should change who you are. This freedom also requires you to grieve the fantasy of universal approval. Part of you may still believe that if you just try hard enough, if you're just good enough, if you just find the right way to present yourself, everyone will like and approve of you. This fantasy has to die for you to be truly free. Universal approval is impossible, and pursuing it will only lead to exhaustion and resentment. Instead of trying to be liked by everyone, focus on being respected by the people whose opinions actually matter to you. Instead of avoiding all criticism, focus on receiving feedback from people who are qualified to give it and who have your best interests at heart. Instead of hiding your true self to avoid judgment, focus on surrounding yourself with people who appreciate authenticity and can handle your full humanity. The ultimate irony is that when you stop trying to control what others think about you, you actually become more likable and respected. Authenticity is magnetic. People are drawn to those who are comfortable in their own skin, who aren't constantly seeking approval or validation. When you're not performing for others' approval, you can show up genuinely, which creates real connection and trust. This freedom doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice, a daily choice to value your own inner voice over the crowd's opinions. It requires courage to disappoint others sometimes. It requires strength to stand alone when necessary. It requires wisdom to distinguish between feedback worth considering and judgment worth ignoring. But the reward for this work is extraordinary. You get to live your own life. You get to pursue your own dreams. You get to be your authentic self. You get to make decisions based on your values rather than other people's expectations. You get to experience the incredible lightness that comes from putting down that backpack of others' opinions and walking forward as the free, authentic, autonomous person you were born to be. Chapter 11. Advanced Emotional Immunity. Handling the most challenging people and situations. Now that you understand the fundamentals of not taking things personally, it's time to develop advanced emotional immunity. This is about handling the most challenging people and situations that would have previously destroyed your peace of mind. We're talking about dealing with narcissists, manipulators, chronic victims, and emotionally volatile people who seem determined to make their problems your problems. Let's start with narcissistic personalities, because these are the people who can make even the most emotionally healthy person question their sanity. Narcissists operate from a place of deep insecurity disguised as grandiosity. They need constant validation and will use any means necessary to get it, including making you responsible for their emotional state. They're masters of projection, blame shifting, and emotional manipulation. When dealing with narcissistic behavior, remember that everything they do and say is about maintaining their fragile self-image, not about anything you've actually done wrong. When they rage at you, they're not responding to your behavior. They're responding to the threat you pose, to their carefully constructed self-perception when they blame you for their problems. They're not giving you accurate information about causation. They're protecting themselves from having to face their own responsibility. The key to maintaining emotional immunity with narcissistic people is understanding that you cannot reason with them, fix them, or make them see your perspective. Their entire psychological structure is built around avoiding accountability and maintaining their superior self-image. Trying to get them to acknowledge your feelings or take responsibility for their behavior is like trying to get water to flow uphill. It's not going to happen and you'll exhaust yourself trying. Instead, focus on what you can control: your responses, your boundaries, and your expectations. Keep interactions factual and brief. Don't share personal information that can be used against you later. Don't expect empathy, fairness, or genuine apologies. Protect your emotional energy by not engaging in arguments or trying to defend yourself against their distortions. Remember, you don't need their approval, understanding, or validation to know your own truth. Chronic victims present a different but equally challenging dynamic. These are people who consistently present themselves as powerless and make everyone around them responsible for solving their problems or managing their emotions. They drain your energy with endless complaints, crisis situations, and requests for help. But they never actually implement solutions or take responsibility for changing their circumstances. The trap with chronic victims is that they trigger your compassion and desire to help. But helping them often enables their dysfunction rather than empowering them to grow. They become addicted to the attention and care they receive from being in crisis and unconsciously sabotage any real progress that would end their victim status. To maintain emotional immunity with chronic victims, you must distinguish between someone who is temporarily struggling and needs support and someone who has made victimhood their identity. Real victims work towards solutions. Chronic victims resist solutions because solving their problems would end the secondary benefits they get from being helpless. Set clear limits on how much emotional energy you'll invest in their problems. Offer practical suggestions once, but don't keep repeating advice they won't follow. Don't take responsibility for their choices or their emotional reactions to reality. Express empathy without taking on their emotional state. Most importantly, don't feel guilty for protecting your energy from being drained by their endless neediness. Emotionally volatile people create chaos wherever they go. Their moods change rapidly and dramatically, and they expect everyone around them to adjust to their emotional weather. They might be loving and appreciative one day, then cold and critical the next, often with no clear trigger or explanation. They use their emotional intensity to control situations and get their needs met. The mistake most people make with emotionally volatile individuals is trying to prevent their emotional outbursts by walking on eggshells and managing their moods. This gives them tremendous power over your behavior and mental state. You become hypervigilant to their emotional state, constantly monitoring and adjusting your behavior to avoid triggering their volatility. To maintain immunity, you must accept that you cannot control their emotional state and stop trying. Let them have their emotions without making those emotions your responsibility. Respond consistently regardless of their mood. Don't reward emotional manipulation with compliance or attention. Maintain your boundaries even when they're upset about those boundaries. Manipulative people are perhaps the most challenging because they're skilled at making you feel guilty, obligated, or responsible for their needs and wants. They use emotional manipulation tactics like guilt trips, silent treatments, emotional blackmail, and playing victim to get you to do what they want. They're experts at finding your soft spots and exploiting your desire to be a good person. The key to immunity against manipulation is recognizing that a genuine request respects your right to say no, while manipulation punishes you for saying no. Healthy people accept your boundaries even if they're disappointed. Manipulative people escalate their pressure when you set boundaries, trying to make you so uncomfortable that you give in to their demands. Don't explain or justify your boundaries to manipulative people. Don't engage in lengthy discussions about why you can't or won't do what they want. Simply state your position calmly and refuse to be drawn into arguments or negotiations. Remember that their emotional reactions to your boundaries are designed to manipulate you back into compliance. Family dynamics often present the most challenging test of your emotional immunity. Because family members have years of history and established patterns of interaction, they know exactly which buttons to push to trigger guilt, shame, or obligation. They often use family loyalty as a weapon to control your choices and behavior. With family, It's crucial to remember that blood relation doesn't give anyone the right to treat you poorly or make you responsible for their emotional well-being. You can love family members while still maintaining healthy boundaries with them. You can be loyal to family while refusing to enable dysfunction or abuse. The most challenging family situations often involve guilt trips about traditions, expectations, and obligations. Family should always come first. You're being selfish. We sacrificed for you. These statements are designed to make you feel guilty for having your own life, needs, and boundaries. Remember that healthy families want their members to grow, thrive, and become independent, not to remain anxious and codependent. Advanced emotional immunity requires you to be comfortable with other people's discomfort, disappointment, and anger. This is perhaps the most difficult skill to develop because most of us are conditioned to avoid causing others pain. But when you make other people's comfort more important than your own well-being, you give them enormous power over your choices and behavior. Developing this immunity doesn't mean becoming cruel or indifferent. It means accepting that you cannot live an authentic boundaried life without sometimes disappointing others. It means understanding that some people's comfort depends on your discomfort. And that's not a price you should be willing to pay indefinitely. Chapter 12. How to stay connected without getting contaminated by others. Emotions. One of the biggest fears people have about not taking things personally is that they'll become cold, disconnected, or unable to maintain close relationships. This fear keeps many people trapped in emotional codependency, believing that love requires them to absorb others' pain and make others' problems their own. But this couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, the ability to stay emotionally connected without becoming emotionally contaminated is the hallmark of mature, healthy relationships. Emotional contamination happens when you absorb other people's emotions as if they were your own. You feel anxious when they're anxious, depressed when they're depressed, angry when they're angry. You lose track of where their emotions end and yours begin. While this might feel like empathy or love, it's actually a form of emotional dysfunction that helps no one and often makes situations worse. True empathy is the ability to understand and care about someone else's emotional experience without taking on that emotion yourself. It's feeling with someone, not feeling as someone. When you practice true empathy, you can be present for someone's pain without being consumed by it. You can offer support and comfort while maintaining your own emotional center. The difference is crucial. When you absorb someone else's anxiety, you now have two anxious people instead of one calm person who can think clearly and offer genuine help. When you take on someone else's depression, you become another person who needs support rather than someone who can provide it. When you match someone's anger with your own, you escalate conflict instead of resolving it. Staying connected without contamination starts with understanding that each person is responsible for their own emotional experience. You can care deeply about someone's struggles without making those struggles your own. You can be supportive and loving without sacrificing your own emotional well-being. In fact, maintaining your emotional center allows you to be much more helpful and present for others. This requires developing what psychologists call emotional differentiation. This is the ability to distinguish between your emotions and other people's emotions to stay connected to your own inner experience even when you're in close relationship with others. It's the capacity to be influenced by others without being overwhelmed by them. Emotional differentiation allows you to respond to others from choice rather than reaction. When your friend is having a crisis, you can choose to be supportive without automatically becoming stressed yourself. When your partner is in a bad mood, you can choose to be understanding without letting their mood dictate your emotional state. When your family member is angry, you can choose to listen without becoming defensive or angry. In return, one of the most powerful tools for maintaining connection without contamination is what I call emotional mirroring versus emotional matching. Emotional matching is when you unconsciously take on the other person's emotional state. They're angry, so you become angry. They're sad, so you become sad. This is reactive and unconscious. Emotional mirroring, on the other hand, is when you consciously reflect back their emotional experience without taking it on yourself. You acknowledge their anger without becoming angry. You validate their sadness without becoming sad. You understand their fear without becoming afraid. This is responsive and conscious. For example, if your friend is anxious about a job interview, emotional matching would be you becoming anxious too, maybe offering nervous advice or catastrophizing about what could go wrong. Emotional mirroring would be saying something like, "I can see you're really nervous about this. That makes sense given how important this opportunity is to you. What would be most helpful for you right now?" The mirroring response acknowledges their emotion, validates it as understandable, and stays focused on supporting them rather than managing your own emotional reaction to their emotion. You remain calm and centered, which allows you to actually be helpful rather than adding to their stress. This skill is particularly important in romantic relationships where emotional fusion is often mistaken for intimacy. Many couples believe that a loving relationship means feeling everything together, sharing all emotions and being completely intertwined emotionally. While emotional connection is important, emotional enmeshment is actually destructive to relationships. Healthy couples maintain their individual emotional identities while staying connected. They can support each other through difficulties without both partners falling apart. They can share their struggles without making their partner responsible for fixing those struggles. They can be influenced by each other's emotions without losing themselves in those emotions. In parenting, this skill is absolutely crucial. Children need parents who can stay calm and regulated even when the child is dysregulated. A parent who matches a child's tantrum with their own emotional meltdown teaches the child that emotions are uncontrollable and overwhelming. A parent who stays calm while acknowledging the child's emotions teaches emotional regulation by example. The same principle applies in professional relationships. A good manager can acknowledge an employee's frustration without becoming frustrated themselves. They can understand the stress their team is under without taking on that stress as their own. This allows them to think clearly, make good decisions, and provide the leadership their team needs. Staying connected without contamination also requires understanding the difference between caring and caretaking. Caring is about genuine love and concern for another person's well-being. Caretaking is about trying to manage, fix, or control another person's emotional experience. Caring respects the other person's autonomy and ability to handle their own life. Caretaking assumes they're incapable and need you to manage their emotions for them. When you care for someone, you offer support, encouragement, and presence. When you caretake someone, you try to prevent their pain, solve their problems, and manage their emotions. Caring enhances relationships. Caretaking creates codependency. Caring maintains healthy boundaries. Caretaking violates them. The most challenging aspect of staying connected without contamination is dealing with people who are used to your emotional reactivity. When you stop absorbing their emotions and taking on their problems, they might escalate their emotional expression, trying to get you to engage in the old pattern. They might accuse you of not caring, being cold, or abandoning them. This is where your commitment to healthy relationship dynamics will be tested. You have to stay consistent in your new approach even when others pressure you to return to the old patterns. You have to trust that maintaining your emotional center ultimately serves the relationship better than emotional fusion, even if it's uncomfortable in the short term. Remember that teaching others how to treat you includes modeling emotional self-regulation. When you stay calm in the face of their emotional storms, you're showing them that it's possible to remain centered even during difficult times. When you refuse to take on their emotions, you're teaching them that they're capable of handling their own emotional experiences. Chapter 13. The Workplace Warrior. Never taking professional criticism personally again. The workplace presents unique challenges for not taking things personally because your professional identity, financial security, and career advancement are all potentially at stake. When a boss criticizes your work, when a colleague undermines your project, when you're passed over for promotion, or when you receive negative performance feedback, it can feel like your entire future is being threatened. But this is exactly when the skill of not taking things personally becomes most valuable and most difficult to maintain. Let's start with the most common workplace trigger: receiving criticism or negative feedback from supervisors. Your boss points out mistakes in your work, questions your approach, or suggests improvements. The old you would immediately spiral. They think I'm incompetent. I'm going to get fired. I'm a failure. Maybe I'm not cut out for this job. The new you understands that feedback is information, not evaluation of your worth as a person. Professional feedback is almost always about specific behaviors, skills, or outcomes, not about your character or value as a human being. When your manager says your presentation needs more data, they're not saying you're stupid. When they suggest you improve your time management, they're not saying you're lazy. When they point out communication issues, they're not saying you're a bad person. They're giving you information about how to be more effective in your role. The key is separating your professional performance from your personal identity. You are not your job. Your work output does not define your worth. Your current skill level is not a permanent reflection of your potential. This separation allows you to receive professional feedback as valuable information for growth rather than as attacks on your character. Understanding workplace dynamics also helps tremendously. Most criticism from supervisors is not personal. It's systemic. They have their own pressures, deadlines, and performance metrics they need to meet. Their feedback to you is often driven by pressure they're receiving from above, organizational changes, or external factors that have nothing to do with your individual performance. When your boss seems unusually critical or demanding, look at the bigger picture. Are they dealing with budget pressures? Are they getting pressure from their own supervisor? Is the company going through changes or challenges? Are their industry pressures affecting everyone? Often what feels like personal criticism is actually them trying to manage organizational stress, and you happen to be on the receiving end. Colleague relationships present different challenges because the power dynamics are more equal, which can make conflicts feel more personal. When a coworker takes credit for your idea, when someone talks over you in meetings, when a colleague is passive-aggressive or openly competitive, it's easy to take these behaviors personally and create workplace drama. The reality is that workplace behavior is almost always driven by people's own career insecurities, their communication style, their cultural background, their stress level, or their learned patterns of professional interaction. The colleague who interrupts you constantly might have grown up in a family where interrupting was normal. Or they might be so anxious about appearing competent that they overparticipate in meetings. The person who takes credit for your work might be insecure about their own contributions and trying to prove their value. This doesn't make their behavior acceptable. But understanding the likely motivations helps you respond strategically rather than emotionally. Instead of taking it personally and getting upset, you can address the behavior directly and professionally. Instead of creating drama and conflict, you can focus on solutions and boundaries. Office politics is another area where not taking things personally is crucial. You might not be included in certain meetings, invited to specific events, or considered for particular projects. While these exclusions can feel personal, they're usually about organizational dynamics, budget constraints, role definitions, or simply logistics. Making them about your worth or likability creates unnecessary stress and often leads to counterproductive responses. When you're not included in something, instead of assuming it's because people don't like you or value your contributions, consider practical explanations. Was it a meeting for a specific department? Was it about topics outside your role? Was it a small group focused on a particular project? Are there budget or space constraints? Often what feels like personal rejection is actually just business logistics. Performance reviews and evaluations are particularly triggering because they feel like formal judgments of your worth and competence. But performance reviews are organizational tools designed to align your efforts with company objectives, identify development opportunities, and document your growth. They're not personal report cards on your value as a human being. Even negative performance reviews are usually about the gap between your current performance and the role requirements, not about your potential or worth. They're road maps for improvement, not verdicts on your capabilities. The most successful people use performance reviews as data for professional development rather than evidence of their inadequacy. Workplace rejection, like not getting a promotion or being turned down for a new opportunity, can feel intensely personal. But hiring and promotion decisions are based on numerous factors that have nothing to do with your personal worth. Budget constraints, organizational needs, timing, specific skill requirements, cultural fit with particular teams, or simply the availability of other candidates who might be a better match for that specific role at that specific time. Not getting a promotion doesn't mean you're not promotable. Not being selected for a project doesn't mean you're not capable. Not being hired for a position doesn't mean you're not hireable. These decisions are about organizational fit and timing, not about your fundamental value or potential. The most challenging workplace situation for not taking things personally is dealing with difficult colleagues or toxic work environments. Some people are genuinely unpleasant to work with. They're chronically negative. They undermine others. They're inconsistent or unreliable. They create conflict wherever they go. When you have to interact with these people regularly, it's easy to take their behavior personally. Remember that difficult people are difficult with everyone. Their behavior is about their own issues, not about anything specific to you. The colleague who's always critical is critical of everyone. The person who's unreliable fails to follow through with everyone. The individual who's negative complains about everything. You're not being singled out. You're just experiencing their consistent patterns. This understanding helps you develop appropriate responses. Instead of trying to win over the difficult person or wondering what you did wrong, you can focus on professional strategies, clear documentation, consistent boundaries, minimal personal interaction, and focusing on what you can control rather than trying to change them. Building workplace resilience also requires understanding that your career is a long-term journey, not a series of personal victories and defeats. One bad review, one missed promotion, one difficult project, or one challenging boss doesn't define your professional future. Your career will have ups and downs, and taking each setback personally will exhaust you and limit your ability to learn and grow from the experience. The most successful professionals treat workplace challenges as opportunities to develop resilience, improve skills, and clarify their career goals. They use criticism to become better at their jobs. They use difficult relationships to practice professional communication and boundary setting. They use setbacks to reassess their priorities and redirect their efforts more effectively. Chapter 14. Creating authentic confidence that can't be shaken by external opinions. Authentic confidence is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in personal development. Most people think confidence means never feeling doubt, always knowing what to do, or being naturally charming and outgoing. But true confidence isn't about being perfect or never experiencing insecurity. It's about having such a solid relationship with yourself that external opinions can't fundamentally shake your sense of who you are and what you're capable of. The difference between authentic confidence and false confidence is crucial. False confidence is based on external validation, achievements, and comparison to others. It fluctuates based on circumstances. You feel confident when people praise you, when you're successful, when things are going well. You lose confidence when people criticize you, when you fail, when things get difficult. This type of confidence is actually a house built on sand, always vulnerable to being knocked down by the next wave of external feedback. Authentic confidence, on the other hand, is based on self-acceptance, internal validation, and a deep understanding of your own worth that isn't dependent on external circumstances. It remains stable regardless of what others think, say, or do. It's not about thinking you're perfect. It's about accepting yourself completely, including your imperfections, and trusting your ability to handle whatever life brings you. Building authentic confidence starts with developing an honest, compassionate relationship with yourself. This means acknowledging both your strengths and your areas for growth without making either one mean anything about your fundamental worth. You can recognize that you're not good at something without making that mean you're a failure. You can celebrate your talents without needing to be the best at everything. Self-awareness is the foundation of authentic confidence. You need to know who you are, your values, your strengths, your limitations, your triggers, your patterns, your dreams, your fears. This self-knowledge allows you to make decisions from authenticity rather than from the need to impress others or meet external expectations. When you truly know yourself, other people's opinions become interesting information rather than threats to your identity. If someone criticizes something you know is one of your strengths, you can consider whether there's any validity to their feedback without doubting your overall competence. If someone praises something you know you struggle with, you can appreciate the compliment without becoming dependent on their validation. Authentic confidence also requires accepting that you're a work in progress. Confident people aren't people who have arrived at perfection. They're people who are comfortable with the process of growth. They can admit when they don't know something without feeling ashamed. They can make mistakes without their self-worth crashing. They can receive feedback without becoming defensive. They can try new things without needing to excel immediately. This growth mindset is liberating because it means you never have to pretend to be more than you are or defend yourself against the truth of your current limitations. You can be honest about your skill level, your experience, your knowledge, because your worth isn't dependent on being perfect. You're worthy because you're a human being committed to learning and growing, not because you've already mastered everything. Another crucial component of authentic confidence is developing your own internal validation system. Instead of constantly seeking approval from others, you learn to recognize and appreciate your own efforts, progress, and positive qualities. You become your own cheerleader instead of relying on others to tell you when you're doing well. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback from others or becoming arrogant. It means developing the ability to validate your own experiences and achievements before seeking external confirmation. When you accomplish something, you take a moment to acknowledge your effort and progress. When you handle a difficult situation well, you give yourself credit. When you grow or learn something new, you celebrate that growth internally. Internal validation also means trusting your own perceptions and experiences. If someone tells you that you're too sensitive, but you know your emotional awareness is actually one of your strengths, you trust your own understanding of yourself. If someone suggests you're not leadership material, but you know you've successfully led projects and teams, you trust your own experience over their opinion. This internal trust is developed through paying attention to your own life rather than constantly comparing yourself to others. You notice your own progress, your own patterns, your own responses. You become the expert on your own experience rather than outsourcing that expertise to others. Authentic confidence requires comfortable with being disliked or misunderstood by some people. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect for most people because we're social creatures with a deep need for acceptance and belonging. But the truth is that if you're living authentically, if you're being true to your values and expressing your genuine personality, some people won't like you. And that's not only okay, it's necessary. Universal likability is impossible and would require you to be so bland and agreeable that you'd lose all personality and authenticity. The people who matter, the people who are meant to be in your life, will appreciate your authenticity, even when they don't always agree with your choices. The people who only like you when you're pleasing them or meeting their expectations aren't really connecting with the real you anyway. Confident people understand that rejection often has nothing to do with their worth and everything to do with fit, timing, or the other person's needs and preferences. When someone doesn't want to be friends with you, it doesn't mean you're not a good friend. When someone doesn't want to date you, it doesn't mean you're not lovable. When someone doesn't hire you, it doesn't mean you're not capable. It means you weren't the right match for that specific situation. This understanding allows you to take appropriate risks without being paralyzed by the fear of rejection. You can apply for jobs you're excited about even if you might not get them. You can express your opinions even if others might disagree. You can pursue relationships even if they might not work out. You can try new things even if you might not excel immediately. Authentic confidence also means setting and maintaining boundaries without guilt or extensive explanation. You know what works for you and what doesn't. You know what you're willing to do and what you're not. You can say no to requests that don't align with your values or priorities without feeling like you need to justify your decision to everyone involved. This boundary setting isn't about being selfish or inconsiderate. It's about being honest about your capacity, your priorities, and your needs. It's about taking responsibility for your own well-being so you can show up authentically in your relationships rather than building resentment by constantly doing things you don't want to do. The most powerful aspect of authentic confidence is that it's contagious. When you're comfortable with yourself, others feel more comfortable around you. When you're not constantly seeking validation, people are more likely to offer genuine appreciation. When you're not defensive about your limitations, people are more willing to share their own struggles. When you're authentic, you give others permission to be authentic, too. Chapter 15. Your New Life, Thriving Free from the Need for Everyone's Approval. This is where everything comes together. You've learned why your brain takes things personally, how to recognize when other people's behavior is about them rather than you, how to build internal worth that can't be shaken by external opinions, and how to maintain emotional boundaries that protect your peace. Now, it's time to paint a picture of what your life looks like when you've mastered these skills. This is about more than just not taking things personally. This is about creating a life of authentic freedom, genuine confidence, and deep inner peace. Imagine waking up in the morning without immediately checking your phone to see if anyone has responded to your messages. Without anxiety about potential conflicts or criticism, without the heavy weight of wondering what everyone thinks about you. Your first thoughts are about your own priorities, your own goals, your own feelings about the day ahead. You're starting from a place of internal connection rather than external seeking in this new life. Your relationships are dramatically different. They're based on authentic connection rather than performance. You show up as yourself, not as who you think others want you to be. You share your real thoughts and feelings instead of saying what you think will get the best reaction. You set boundaries when needed. Instead of people leasing your way into resentment, you support others without taking on their emotions as your own. Because you're not constantly walking on eggshells or managing other people's reactions, your relationships become much more relaxed and genuine. People feel safe around you because you're not reactive or defensive. They trust you because you're consistent and authentic. They respect you because you respect yourself. The relationships that were based on codependency or people-pleasing naturally fall away while the healthy relationships deepen and flourish. Your career takes on a completely different quality. You make decisions based on your values, interests, and goals rather than on what you think will make others happy or what will avoid potential criticism. You speak up in meetings when you have valuable input to offer. You take on challenging projects because you're excited about the growth opportunity, not because you're afraid of disappointing anyone. You advocate for yourself professionally because your worth isn't dependent on being low maintenance or constantly agreeable. When you receive criticism at work, you evaluate it objectively. If it's useful feedback, you implement the suggestions and improve your performance. If it's unfair or inaccurate, you don't internalize it as truth about your capabilities. You can disagree professionally without taking the disagreement personally. You can handle conflict without your self-worth being threatened by the tension. Your decision-making process becomes much clearer and faster. Instead of agonizing over what others will think about your choices, you consider your own values, priorities, and long-term goals. You can take calculated risks because you're not paralyzed by the fear of judgment. You can make mistakes without your confidence being shattered because you understand that failure is part of growth, not evidence of inadequacy. This freedom extends to all areas of your life. You dress the way you want to dress, not to impress others or avoid criticism. You pursue hobbies and interests that genuinely excite you, not those that will make you seem impressive or successful. You spend your time and energy on things that matter to you, not on managing other people's opinions of your choices. Your mental and emotional health improves dramatically. The chronic stress of constantly monitoring other people's reactions and taking responsibility for their emotions starts to fade. Your nervous system begins to regulate because you're not constantly in fight or flight mode, waiting for the next criticism or rejection. You sleep better, think more clearly, and have more energy for the things that actually matter to you. The most profound change is in your relationship with yourself. You become your own best friend instead of your harshest critic. You speak to yourself with kindness and compassion instead of judgment and criticism. You trust your own perceptions and experiences instead of constantly doubting yourself based on others' opinions. You appreciate your own efforts and progress instead of waiting for external validation to feel good about yourself. This doesn't mean you become isolated or indifferent to others. In fact, because you're not constantly defending yourself or seeking approval, you become much more present and available for genuine connection. You can listen to others without making their problems about you. You can offer support without taking on their emotional states. You can love deeply without losing yourself in the process. You also become much more discerning about who you allow into your inner circle because you're not desperate for approval. You don't tolerate poor treatment or dysfunctional relationships. You surround yourself with people who appreciate your authenticity, respect your boundaries, and support your growth. You're attracted to other emotionally healthy people, and they're attracted to you. Your contribution to the world becomes more impactful because you're operating from authenticity rather than performance. You're not trying to be what you think others want. You're being who you actually are and offering your unique gifts and perspectives. This authenticity makes your work, your relationships, and your presence more valuable and meaningful. The fear that kept you trapped in people-pleasing and external validation begins to dissolve. You realize that the things you were so afraid of, being disliked, being criticized, being rejected, are not actually threats to your well-being or survival. They're just part of the human experience, and you can handle them without being destroyed by them. You develop what I call emotional immunity. Criticism bounces off you like water off a duck's back. Other people's bad moods don't contaminate your emotional state. Rejection doesn't crush your spirit. Conflict doesn't send you into panic mode. You become resilient, centered, and unshakable. Not because nothing ever goes wrong, but because you know you can handle whatever comes your way. This emotional immunity doesn't make you cold or disconnected. It makes you more loving because you can love without fear. More generous because you can give without depletion. More supportive because you can help without enabling. More present because you're not constantly worried about managing impressions. Perhaps most importantly, you become free to pursue your own path, your own dreams, your own vision of success and fulfillment. You're not limited by other people's expectations or definitions of what your life should look like. You're not held back by fear of judgment or criticism. You're not trapped by the need for constant approval. This is the ultimate freedom. The freedom to be yourself, to make your own choices, to create your own life, to define your own success, to love and be loved authentically. This is what becomes possible when you stop taking things personally and start taking responsibility for your own emotional experience. This isn't just a nice idea or a temporary feeling. This is a completely different way of living that becomes more natural and automatic the more you practice it. The skills you've learned in this content aren't just techniques to use occasionally. They're the foundation for a fundamentally different relationship with yourself and others. Your new life is waiting for you. It starts the moment you decide that other people's opinions, moods, and reactions are not more important than your own inner peace and authenticity. It starts when you choose to take responsibility for your own emotions while letting others be responsible for theirs. It starts when you decide that your worth is not up for debate regardless of what anyone else thinks or says. The only question left is, are you ready to stop taking things personally and start living the free, authentic, confident life you deserve? The tools are in your hands. The choice is yours. Your new life is waiting.